It was 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the grease trap at this Waffle House off Interstate 95 was giving off a familiar stench, a distinct blend of bad decisions and burnt bacon. Marcus was busy working a stubborn layer of hash brown crust off the grill with his heavy iron spatula when the front glass doors suddenly exploded inward. Crunching over the shattered glass was a 7-foot-tall, heavily armored insectoid alien, wielding a humming particle blaster with enough energy output to vaporize a Ford Taurus. The freak let out an ear-piercing shriek that shattered the few remaining coffee mugs on the counter, its mandibles clicking rapidly as it leveled the weapon at the terrified late-night diners. Marcus didn't even blink. Had worked the graveyard shift here for 7 years, been stabbed with plastic forks twice, and once threw a deadbeat biker clean through those very glass doors. He took his sweet time wiping his hands on his grease-stained apron, picked up a fresh, boiling hot pot of decaf, and locked eyes with the alien invader. "Listen here, big bug," Marcus said, his voice dead flat, completely devoid of surprise or fear. "You're either gonna find a booth and order something, or you can step behind this counter and see what real high energy output feels like. I ain't got time for this bullshit." Before the monster could even process the threat, Marcus chucked the entire pot of boiling black sludge right at its face. The scalding brown liquid slammed dead center into the alien scout's front visor with a violent hiss. Its crystal, clear optical sensors instantly fogged over into a milky white mess, while the overlapping biocorp armor at the seams curled and peeled from the intense heat. Molten yellow-green armor fluid dripped down the edges of the visor, bubbling violently as it hit the greasy floor tiles. The scout let out a high-frequency death squeal as the boiling liquid burned straight through its neural protection layer. Blinded, the monster flailed its arms wildly, causing the particle blaster to misfire. A blinding blue-white beam grazed right past Marcus' ear and obliterated a wooden crate of bagged flour in the back kitchen. A snowstorm of fine white powder instantly filled the room, coating Marcus' eyelashes in a thick layer of dust. Marcus still didn't flinch. He stood his ground, didn't back up a single inch, and waited for the freak's wildly swinging arm to come within range. When it did, he brought his heavy-duty stainless steel spatula down like a meat cleaver, directly onto its exposed wrist. Crack. The alien's calcified wrist bone splintered into 3 distinct pieces. The humming particle blaster slipped from its grasp and plummeted, but Marcus just reached out and snatched it mid-air, his rough palm wrapping tightly around the ice, cold energy grip. The second he got a solid grip on the weapon, he heard a new sound from the shattered entryway, the heavy crunch of armored boots grinding over broken glass. A shadow, even more massive than the first scout, pressed against the splintered doorframe and charged out of the dining room's dim shadows. The exoskeleton scraped against the wooden frame, sending splinters raining down. Foul, acidic ichor leaked from the gaps in its joints, splashing onto a window side tablecloth and instantly burning black, smoking holes through the fabric. Marcus kicked the twitching, smoking corpse of the first scout under a booth, weighed the stolen particle blaster in his hand, and spat out an impatient curse. "Feels like hollow plastic. Ain't worth shit." The Imperial Stormtrooper raised its fully charged blaster right at him, a blue-white halo already humming at the muzzle. Marcus didn't bother dodging. He stepped into the swing, pivoted his hips, and swung the entire alien rifle like a baseball bat. The polymer stock connected dead, center on the exoskeleton joint of the trooper's jaw. A sickening crack echoed out, followed by the muffled thud of shattering carapace, and a tidal wave of corrosive yellow-green fluid sprayed right across Marcus' face. The Imperial Stormtrooper, a beast 2 heads taller than Marcus, didn't even get a chance to scream. Its neck snapped at a structurally impossible angle, its entire lower jaw shattered into pieces. The massive body crashed down, obliterating 2-4. Top tables and taking a sticky mess of glass cups and syrup dispensers with it. Marcus wiped the foul muck off his face with the back of his hand, not even blinking. He had exactly 12 minutes left on shift. These freaks were cutting into his overtime, and now he was going to have to sweep up all this damn glass. The more he thought about it, the more pissed off he got. He tossed the useless blaster behind his back, turned toward the stove, and grabbed his trusty 20-pound cast iron skillet, a pan he'd been using for 7 years straight. The rim of the skillet was still slick with morning bacon grease, the residual heat making the grime on his wrists sizzle. He weighed the heavy iron in his hand. Just as he looked up, a solid wall of blue-purple plasma shields flared to life in the darkness of the front entrance. The synchronized, thunderous thud of heavy boots shook the floor hard enough to make the spilled sugar packets dance, and the hum of charging energy weapons grew deafening. The Imperial Marines unleashed their first volley. Blaster bolts shredded the Daily Specials blackboard, sending a storm of chalk dust and sticky wooden shrapnel flying everywhere. Marcus cussed under his breath, planted his rough hands on the heavy-gauge stainless steel prep counter, and dropped his shoulder into it with everything he had. The 1-ton slab of steel, complete with the takeout boxes and ticket machine, crashed down to the floor. It formed a perfect makeshift barricade right between him and the Marines. Blaster fire hammered into the steel plate, sparking blinding blue flashes and leaving warped, blackened craters in the metal. Marcus squinted through the smoke, peering over the edge of the counter. He locked eyes with the lead Imperial heavy trooper. The freak's plasma feed tube was exposed just below its shield, buzzing with blue light as it charged up a shot meant to obliterate his barricade. He flicked his wrist. The 20-pound cast iron skillet left his hand, spinning through the air like a lethal frisbee from a pro quarterback, accompanied by a vicious, whistling shriek. Clang. The thick iron rim smashed dead on into the feed tube's connection joint, snapping the half-inch energy pipe cleanly in two. Superheated liquid plasma sprayed wildly, splashing directly onto the trooper's visor. Blue-purple steam hissed from the armor seams as the monster let out a high-frequency scream of pure agony. Clutching its head, it fell straight backward, toppling the 2 stormtroopers right behind it. The Imperial Marine formation faltered for a half-second before they rallied and laid down a torrential wall of fire. Concentrated blaster bolts turned the prep counter into Swiss cheese. The drawer holding the sugar packets exploded, sending a blizzard of white sugar drifting through the dining room. Using the smoke for cover, Marcus crouched and fell back. Holding a scavenged blaster in one hand, he fired 2 blind shots over his shoulder. The bolts perfectly blew the shoulder pads off the 2 fastest-moving scouts. He backed up to the kitchen door curtain, his fingertips finally brushing the cold door handle. Through the thick fog of sugar dust and ozone, he could hear the heavy boots of the Imperial stormtroopers trampling over the overturned tables, getting closer by the second. He pushed down on the cold stainless steel handle. It clicked open. Marcus ducked sideways and slipped into the back kitchen, his shoulder blades knocking against a rack of spatulas, sending them clattering. The Imperial Marines' heavy boots had already reached the edge of the prep counter. Searing blaster fire grazed the doorframe, sending molten wood splinters biting into Marcus' neck. He gritted his teeth. He didn't have time to complain about the pain. His mind was entirely consumed by the fact that these sons of bitches were interrupting his 3 a.m. oil change. He took 3 long strides to the commercial deep fryer, yanked the power cord out of the wall, and wrapped his rough hands around the scorching hot cast iron handles. Dropping his hips, he hefted an entire vat of 350-degree boiling grease. Fine droplets of hot oil splashed against his grease-stained apron, smoking the fabric instantly, but he didn't even flinch. The heavy solid wood back door shuddered violently as the Imperial stormtroopers rammed it. The hinges groaned under the strain, and 3 blaster bolts punched clean through the wood, leaving 3 blackened craters in the tile wall behind him. A second later, a shoulder-charging trooper busted half the door open. 3 Imperial stormtroopers squeezed into the doorway, silver plasma shields flaring to life across their chests. Marcus stepped forward, letting his momentum carry him, and hurled the entire vat of boiling grease right in their faces. A tidal wave of bright yellow oil and crispy starch remnants slammed into the shields. The energy barriers built to withstand particle weapons screamed into overload. The blue light flashed frantically for 2 seconds before completely dying out. The 350-degree oil cascaded unimpeded over their armor. precision joints instantly bubbled and melted. Optical visors were scorched into opaque black lumps in less than a second. Boiling grease poured down their collars right into the suits. The three troopers let out deafening, high-pitched shrieks, slipping and tumbling backward into the dining room in a tangled, thrashing pile. Only the squad captain, who wore thicker armor and took the charge up front, managed to stay somewhat upright. Only half his chest was soaked. He spasmed on the threshold, most of his ribs crushed, wildly firing his blaster and blowing a chunk of metal off the exhaust hood. A waterfall of ancient coagulated grease immediately started dripping down. Marcus dropped the empty fryer vat at his feet with a loud clatter. His knuckles were white around the grip of his particle blaster as he took slow, deliberate steps toward the twitching freak on the floor. The captain's chest was still smoking from where the hot oil had melted through to its biological tissue. The visor was cracked wide open. All 6 of its limbs twitched uncontrollably as a high-frequency hiss rattled in its throat. It was probably spewing some hardcore Imperial military bullshit, but Marcus didn't understand a word and didn't give a damn anyway. He freed his left hand, slick with fry oil and kosher salt, reached down to the captain's tactical belt, ripped off a micro, bomb flashing with a dangerous blue light, and shoved it straight into his apron pocket. From the front dining room came the heavy thud of armored boots crushing broken glass. 2 Imperial Marine scouts were closing in fast. Blaster fire swept the kitchen doorframe, sending ceramic tile shrapnel flying everywhere. Marcus kicked the still hissing captain hard, shoving him under the stoves. He glanced at the heavy walk in freezer door against the back wall, sealed with thick industrial caulk, and a cynical, impatient smirk spread across his face. I got 8 minutes till I gotta plate 10 orders of waffles. Y'all wanna die this bad, am happy to oblige. He stood his ground by the stove and fired 2 blind shots toward the approaching footsteps. The blaster bolts blasted 2 smoking craters into the wall tiles, successfully baiting the 2 Marines. 2 shadows, glowing with blue plasma shields, charged recklessly around the corner, firing blindly. Marcus hugged the wall behind the door, gripping the blaster tightly. The second the first alien rushed past his position, Marcus swung the heavy stock right into the gap in its lower back armor. The Marine howled, stumbled forward, and pitched headfirst straight into the walk in freezer. Before the second one could react, Marcus kicked out hard, catching it right behind the knee. The alien lost its footing and tumbled in right behind its buddy. A blast of -20-degree air rolled out of the open door, carrying the raw stench of frozen meat. The 2 Marines scrambled frantically to get up and aim their weapons, blue light sweeping wildly across the icy room. But Marcus had already fallen back to the steel shelving deep inside the freezer. His fingertips brushed against cold plastic shrink wrap. The 20-pound object inside was frozen solid as cast iron. With a flick of his wrist, Marcus hauled out a 20-pound frozen Thanksgiving turkey. The dead weight pulled his forearm down, but he adjusted his grip. This thing felt even better in his hand than that cast iron skillet. The moment the 2 Imperial Marines had crossed into the -20-degree freezer, the frigid air clung to their visors. Frost formed in the armor seams in seconds. Their optical sensors were still frantically trying to adjust to the pitch black environment, and their breathing filtration tubes were already whistling and leaking from the extreme temperature drop. The first Marine fumbled around the metal shelving in the dark, boots crunching loudly over boxes of frozen French fries. The second he poked his helmet out, Marcus lunged forward, swinging the frozen bird. A sickeningly dull thud echoed through the cold room. The Marine's alloy helmet caved in by a solid third. The optical sensors on the visor shattered into a shower of glass splinters. The freak didn't even manage a complete scream before its knees buckled, and it collapsed face first into a pile of frozen blueberry boxes, dead on the spot. The second Marine flinched in terror, raised its blaster, and pulled the trigger. The intense cold had completely seized the trigger spring. The gun just clicked. Marcus stepped in and drove a vicious knee straight into the alien's gut. As it curled up in agony, he brought the frozen block of meat down hard on top of its head. The alien collapsed to the icy floor, clutching its fractured helmet, howling in pain. Marcus smoothly stepped back, kicking the heavy stainless steel freezer door shut behind him. He threw the arm, thick steel deadbolt, into place, with a loud, satisfying clack. The frantic pounding and muffled thuds of plasma blasts against the interior door were completely useless. They couldn't even dent the industrial thermal insulation. He pulled the stolen tactical micro bomb from his pocket, peeled off the adhesive backing, and stuck it dead, center on the lock assembly. He pulled the safety pin. "Cheap-ass space trash, breaking in without paying the damn check," he muttered, turning to leave. Just as he wiped the frost off his work shirt, the hair on the back of his neck stood up. His sharp ears caught a faint metallic clink coming from the exhaust fan grill above him. His hand shot out, fingertips brushing the ice, cold handle of the wall, mounted industrial CO2 fire extinguisher. He yanked the extinguisher off the wall. He bit the safety pin and tore it out with his teeth. He threw his left shoulder hard into the rusted screws holding up the exhaust fan grill. All 4 rusted screws instantly gave way from the softened drywall ceiling. The heavy metal grill crashed down onto the stainless prep table, splashing a wave of grease a foot into the air. 3 Imperial reinforcements were halfway down their rappelling ropes, dark blaster rifles not even leveled yet. Marcus squeezed the trigger. A -78-degree blizzard of dry ice and gas instantly flooded half the kitchen. The blinding white fog mixed with jagged ice crystals blasted the 3 aliens right in the face. The first scout to hit the deck tried to squeeze its trigger, but its knuckles and mechanical joints were instantly coated in half an inch of hard frost. The joint snapped with a crisp crack. The blaster hit the tiled floor, sending ice shards flying. The second trooper panicked and tried to activate its plasma shield, but its shoulder joints froze solid. The alien was stuck there, paralyzed like an ice sculpture bolted to the vent, letting out nothing but a raspy hissing sound from its throat. Every hot breath it took instantly crystallized into frost inside its visor, completely blinding its optical sensors. The third soldier was still hanging halfway down the rope. As it cramped up and tried to climb, the high-density CO2 seeped straight into its mechanical armor gaps. Its entire left leg froze into a solid popsicle from the knee down. The rope snapped under the added weight of the ice, and the alien plummeted, crashing hard into a pile of frozen fry boxes. Its chest plate shattered like a dropped ice cube. From the direction of the walk, in freezer came the low, humming buildup of the microbomb triggering. Marcus kicked the empty extinguisher shell into a corner and wiped the ice crystals off his hands. His stainless steel meat cleaver, tucked securely into his waistband, had already slipped from its sheath. He narrowed his bloodshot, 7-year graveyard shift eyes, locking onto the personal shield generator bulging from the right arm of the most intact ice sculpture. He tightened his grip on the cold handle. He brought his wrist down hard. The 6-inch razor, sharp blade came crashing down right on the seam between the ice buildup and the alien armor. The dry ice frozen armor was as brittle as a 3-month-old beef bone. With a sharp crack, the impact sent ice shards and blue-gray armor fragments flying into the air. The trooper's completely frozen right arm snapped clean off at the shoulder socket, hitting the grease-stained concrete floor with a heavy thud. The half-frozen torso slumped against the exhaust pipe. The Imperial trooper wasn't entirely dead yet. A weak mosquito-like wheeze leaked from the gaps in its chest plate. Dark green blood oozed from the fractured joints, freezing into slush the second it hit the air. Marcus didn't bother finishing it off. He stepped on the severed arm to hold it steady, wedged the tip of his cleaver into the mounting groove of the shield generator, and pried the palm-sized silver device out. The sharp ice cut into his palms, but he just spat a wad of smoke-flavored saliva onto the floor. Piled near the kitchen wall was half a roll of rubber, coated electrical wire left over from a fridge light repair. Marcus tore off 2 long strips. He didn't even bother looking for electrical tape. He just wrapped the wire around the generator 3 times and tied the damn thing tight across his grease and coffee-stained canvas apron. The cold metal generator dug into his sweaty chest. He rolled his shoulders to test the fit. It held firm. He slid the meat cleaver back into his canvas belt loop. A low-frequency rumble erupted from the walk, in freezer, shaking two aluminum ceiling tiles loose. The muffled thuds of the trapped soldiers pounding on the door could be heard straight through 3 layers of reinforced steel. The chaotic gunfire from the dining room had completely died down. Now, the only sound was the deep approaching roar of a hover, engine bleeding in through the shattered windows. A blinding cold blue plasma light swept slowly over the broken dining tables, slanting directly into the kitchen doorway. Marcus reached up to brush the ice off his face. Before he could even drop his hand, the blue light illuminated the silver shield generator strapped to his chest. The tempered glass doors at the front of the restaurant let out an agonizing, ear-piercing groan. A split second later, a massive explosion tore through the front. The entire glass facade, metal framing and all, blew inward in a shower of shrapnel. An Imperial commander, decked out in highly polished interlocking armor, rode a silver hoverbike straight through the carnage, the engine growling with a deep blue light. The heavy blaster cannon mounted on his shoulder was locked dead onto Marcus in the kitchen doorway. There was no monologue. The blaster cannon fired a blinding, white-hot ball of plasma. The shot tore straight through the half-ton stainless steel prep counter standing between Marcus and the dining room. The massive bar disintegrated into a storm of flying metal shrapnel. Syrup pitchers, ceramic plates, and folding chairs were blown to pieces. The neon Waffle House sign that had hung from the ceiling for 10 years was blown half clean off by the shockwave, its flickering red tubes casting an eerie glow over the wreckage. Marcus braced his core and slammed the trigger button on the jury-rigged shield generator. A pale blue energy barrier flared to life instantly. The second plasma round slammed dead, center into the shield. The impact sent a jolt of pure pain through Marcus' shoulder blades, sliding his boot heels across the sticky, syrup-slicked tile and leaving 2 black skid marks. The intense heat wave curled the bottom edges of his apron, filling the air with the smell of scorched grease. The Imperial commander slowly advanced on the hoverbike. His armor's built-in throat amplifier broadcasted a cold, mechanical voice. Inferior carbon, base life form. Surrender the shield generator, and I will grant you a dignified, intact corpse. Marcus spat a wad of greasy saliva onto the floor. His eyes flicked to the mop bucket resting against the baseboard near his feet. Head prepped it half an hour ago to mop the floors, a heavy mixture of high-concentration ammonia and bleach. He didn't say a damn word. His right hand shot out, grabbing the rim of the bucket. Pivoting his hips, he slung the entire bucket of toxic eye-watering chemicals straight at the commander's upper body. The heavy plastic bucket sailed through the air with a whistling swoosh. It smashed dead on into the Imperial commander's crystal faceplate. The lid popped off on impact, and the pale yellow-green cloud of lethal toxic gas instantly flooded through the breathing vents of the helmet. Half a bucket of highly corrosive liquid splashed directly into the seams of his chest plate. The commander's finger froze just as it tightened on the blaster cannon's trigger. The precision filtration system completely failed under the high-concentration chlorine gas assault. He hunched over, violently coughing, letting out a horrific screech that sounded like metal scraping on glass. The optical indicators on his visor flashed wildly, blurring into a chaotic red haze. He clawed frantically at the edges of his helmet, but the integrated Biocorp armor refused to detach. In his panic, he tumbled off the hoverbike, crashing into the splintered wreckage of the prep counter with a heavy clatter. Marcus wiped the droplets of toxic mist off his cheek. The shield generator on his dirty apron buzzed to life, automatically deflecting a stray plasma bolt from the falling commander's weapon. His hand had already closed around the long-handled meat thermometer resting by the stove. It was solid stainless steel, filed down sharper than a bayonet, the tool he usually used to check the core temp on the waffle irons. Marcus took 2 long strides toward the thrashing commander. He dodged the alien's wildly flailing arms, locked onto the exposed gap in the thigh armor, threw his entire body weight behind it, and drove the thermometer deep into the joint. The razor, sharp steel tip punched straight through the armor lining and severed the commander's femoral nerve. The alien let out a deafening wail like a ruptured air compressor, and the entire leg went instantly limp. Without missing a beat, Marcus snatched the high-end service pistol off the commander's belt. The cold metal felt comfortably heavy in his grip. He weighed it in his hand, then spat out the cigarette butt he'd been chewing on all night. Right then, the muffled sound of concentrated blaster fire hammered against the heavy iron security door at the back of the kitchen. The welded door frame was already splintering. An alien assault team from the back alley was breaching the entrance. Marcus tucked the freshly stolen sidearm into his apron belt, then turned to face the massive, 1-ton commercial double-door fridge sitting next to the security exit. The steel door was already partially cut open by Imperial plasma torches. The door panel shuddered from the impacts, raining drywall dust down. Blaster bolts punched through the metal, striking the kitchen tiles and blasting white ceramic shards everywhere. The low growls of the alien shock troopers drifted through the cracks, carrying that distinct, putrid smell of alien biology. Marcus spat out his cigarette butt and crushed it out hard with his boot heel. He threw his grease-stained shoulder heavily against the cold side panel of the fridge. The panel was still sticky with spilled blueberry jam, staining a large purple patch onto his work shirt. He drove his legs into the floor. His old herniated disc popped audibly. His grime-caked work boots slipped on the waxed tile, leaving 2 long black skid marks, but the 1-ton fridge finally began to slide. The stainless steel casters rolled over the scattered debris of alien armor, crushing the brittle plates into scrap metal with loud cracks. The fridge picked up speed, rolling dead straight for the breached security door. A titanium armored arm was the first thing to poke through the gap. The second its claws hooked onto the doorframe, the alien spotted the multi-ton block of metal charging right at it. The trooper let out a high-pitched shriek of absolute panic and opened fire with its blaster, spraying blindly at the fridge. The blue energy bolts harmlessly sparked against the reinforced steel, failing to leave so much as a dent. Boom! The fridge slammed violently into the doorframe, wedging the entire exit completely shut. A chaotic chorus of screams instantly erupted from the other side. The sickening crunch of breaking bones, the hiss of punctured breathing apparatuses, and the frantic pinging of misfired blaster bolts ricocheting inside the alleyway. Less than 10 seconds later, it was dead silent. A few drops of blue alien blood seeped under the fridge, staining the floor in a dark, glowing puddle. Marcus leaned against the top of the fridge, panting heavily. He rubbed his aching lower back and tugged at the shield generator strapped to his chest. The thing was still humming with a steady blue light. It hadn't broken in the scuffle. He stood up straight, wiped the drywall dust off his face, and shot a look down the kitchen hall toward the back door's dirty glass window. Pale green hover lights swept across the brick wall outside. The low-frequency rumble of an Imperial dropship engine vibrated right through the foundation, rattling Marcus' teeth. He dropped a hand onto the stolen commander's pistol at his waist and took long, purposeful strides toward the back door, his boots crunching over the shattered ceramic tiles. He stopped right at the door. He kicked the rusted deadbolt with his right boot. With a loud clang, the metal bolt shot clean off and flew into the alley. The force of the door swinging open knocked over a glass cleaning bucket, spilling a puddle of dirty bleach water onto the concrete. He pulled his leg back and delivered a second brutal kick straight into the red fire extinguisher cabinet mounted on the wall. The thin metal shattered. The heavy cabinet tumbled out of the way, fully clearing the path to the parking lot. Marcus gripped the stolen pistol, still slick with the alien commander's blood, while the shield generator on his chest hummed against his filthy apron. He hunched his shoulders and charged out the door. The freezing night wind whipping off I-95 nearly blew his baseball cap off. The smell of diesel fuel mixed with the scorched ozone of Imperial plasma thrusters filled his lungs. 30 meters away, an Imperial dropship was hovering low over the asphalt, its massive gray hull blocking out half the moon. The loading ramp was wide open, dropping even more reinforcements onto the blacktop. 2 Imperial troopers crouching by the rear bumper of an SUV spun around and raised their rifles. Marcus didn't even flinch. He slightly adjusted his aim and pulled the trigger twice, blowing their optical visors clean off. Neither of them even had time to scream before they collapsed dead by the tires. 3 heavily armored soldiers standing on the dropship ramp froze dead in their tracks. An entire company of elite Imperial stormtroopers had stormed a tiny, dingy Waffle House, and a single human had just walked out alive. They frantically reached for their weapons, but before their fingers even brushed their triggers, Marcus had already lined up his sights perfectly on the dropship's massive belly intake vent. The first shot shattered the aluminum alloy grille. The second shot sheared the turbine blades straight off. The third shot blew a clean hole straight through the fuel stabilizer tank sitting behind the intake. The dropship violently convulsed. The massive aircraft tilted 30 degrees as thick, black smoke began vomiting from the engine intake. The thrusters shrieked like dying metal, and the whole ship plummeted toward the earth. The 3 soldiers on the ramp lost their footing, tumbled out of the bay, and slammed onto the blacktop, shattering their spines with ear-piercing screams. Marcus shook out the smoking pistol, holstered the hot iron at his waist, and turned toward the mud, splattered, beat-up pickup truck parked diagonally near the back exit. He planted his rough hands onto the cold metal of the tailgate. He vaulted into the truck bed, his grease-caked boots kicking empty gas cans out of the way. Digging through a pile of spare tires and dead car batteries, his fingers finally hooked the handle of a 20-pound propane tank. Rust flaked onto his palms. As he hauled it out, his knuckles brushed against the icy metal, still stained with diesel soot from when he got it filled last month. He leaped back down onto the parking lot asphalt. A volley of stray plasma fire sparked violently against the truck's metal siding behind him. The severely crippled Imperial dropship was still struggling to maintain a low hover, and the surviving troopers inside the bay were blindly laying down, suppressing fire. Marcus casually leaned his shoulder away to dodge a stray bolt. He didn't even blink. He dropped the heavy propane tank onto the ground, reached down, and cranked the valve wide open. The hissing sound of pressurized gas immediately filled the air. He grabbed the base of the tank, dropped his hips, and spun in a half circle. Summoning everything he had, he hurled the tank like a game-winning Hail Mary pass. The metal cylinder flew through the air and perfectly lodged itself right into the gap between the dropship's damaged landing gear and the asphalt. Marcus smoothly drew the blood-stained commander's pistol aimed down the sights and pulled the trigger. The plasma round nailed the steel tank right on the weld seam. A massive orange fireball instantly swallowed half the parking lot. The blistering shockwave pushed Marcus back a half step. He held onto his baseball cap so it wouldn't fly off, the intense heat baking his face. Huge chunks of burning dropship shrapnel rained down, cratering the asphalt. The already critical dropship was completely torn in half by the explosion. The burning fuselage plummeted into the roadside bushes, sending up a towering plume of thick black smoke. The dense smoke slowly drifted away, hot embers popping and sizzling around him. Marcus brushed the iron shrapnel off his apron, shoved the hot pistol back into his belt loop, and hopped back into the truck bed. He grabbed a heavy-duty coil of jumper cables he kept for emergencies, his eyes locked dead onto the smoking wreckage. Right there, crawling slowly out of the debris, was a familiar silver-armored figure. He looped the thick jumper cables around his hands, tying a sturdy slipknot. His movements were as practiced and steady as when he lassoed the stray bears that tried to raid the dumpsters. The silver figure finally dragged itself completely out of the rubble. It was the Imperial commander. Half his chest plate had been blown to hell by the shockwave, his rebreather was hissing and leaking gas, and thick yellow-green blood dripped from his armor seams. His one good hand was trembling, desperately reaching for the backup weapon holstered at his lower back. Marcus didn't give him the chance. He closed the distance in 2 strides and flicked his wrist. The heavy jumper cable lasso swooshed through the air and landed perfectly around the commander's thin metal neck. Marcus dropped his weight backward and yanked hard. His forearms, built like steel cables from 7 straight years of flipping burgers, forcefully jerked the commander forward, dragging a pathetic, gasping squeal from his throat. The commander frantically clawed at the thick copper wire. His energy shield didn't even flicker. The explosion had completely drained its power reserves. The heavy-duty cables dug deeper into the metal neck, spraying yellow-green blood all over Marcus' pant leg. Marcus didn't waste a single word. He gripped the other end of the cables, turned his back, and started walking toward the diner. He dragged the 180-pound alien commander straight across the asphalt, leaving a twisted, glowing trail of alien blood in his wake. He hauled him through the broken glass, past the shattered hoverbike parts, through the mangled automatic front doors, and straight into the dining room. He dragged the alien over the overturned booths and bullet-riddled tables, pulling him all the way back into the kitchen. His boots splashed loudly in puddles of stale coffee and black soot. A half-smoked cigarette dangled from his lips, the one he hadn't had time to finish before blowing up the dropship, the ember glowing with every step. Dumbasses. Got a whole damn galaxy to play in, and you gotta come mess with my paycheck. He kicked the dented double-door fridge out of his way, dragging the still, kicking, convulsing commander step by step over to the grease-covered commercial grill. He grabbed the Imperial commander by his star-studded uniform collar, forcefully slamming the alien's coughing, twitching head right onto the edge of the filthy, coagulated grease trap. The jumper cables around the alien's neck were pulled so tight that purple-black blisters formed on its claw like knuckles. The toxic gas had already melted its breathing filter, and every gasp of air felt like razor blades scraping its throat. All it could manage was a muffled, humiliated roar. Marcus rubbed the stubble on his chin with a grease-stained thumb. With his other hand, he grabbed a worn-out steel wool scouring pad that had been hanging by the stove for 6 months and forcefully jammed it between the commander's 2 thickest fingers, forcing the alien's hand to grip it tight. He reached down and ripped the fleet control terminal off the commander's wrist, a palm-sized black slab capable of commanding a fleet across half a solar system. He casually shoved it into his stained apron pocket like it was a cheap receipt. "Listen here, you sumbitch," Marcus rasped, his voice raw from 7 years of night shift chain smoking. He kicked open the lid of the grease trap tucked under the grill, a trap that hadn't been emptied in 3 weeks. A blast of putrid, scalding steam hit the alien square in the face. The commander froze, desperately trying to pull back. "You smashed my counter. You blew up my register. And you're eating into my time to catch the satellite game next door after closing. This grease trap was my job tonight. You made the mess. You scrub it." He planted his heavy boot firmly on the exposed back of the commander's neck, pushing the screaming face 2 inches closer to the rancid opening of the trap. He pulled the half-finished cigarette from behind his ear, clamped it between his chapped lips, and lit it off the glowing embers of the grill. A pale blue smoke ring floated up, drifting over the shattered armor plates, out the blown-out windows and disappearing into the early morning traffic rolling down Interstate 95. Marcus took a long drag, exhaled slowly, and used the toe of his boot to nudge the commander closer to the trap. "Get to work, Commander. The early shift truckers roll in here in 20 minutes, and it'll be damned if I lose my perfect attendance bonus over a dirty grease trap." The morning sun crested the cornfields past the highway, casting a golden light into the devastated Waffle House. An ember popped and sparked on the grill. Nobody would ever believe that a cross-galactic imperial invasion ended right here, next to the grease trap of a graveyard, shift greasy spoon.
Writing the story of Marcus and his 3 AM Waffle House shift was an absolute blast. The core inspiration actually came from a late-night diner run I had years ago. There is a specific kind of mythical chaotic energy that exists in a greasy spoon past midnight, a feeling that no matter what apocalyptic event is unfolding outside, the decaf will still be brewing, and the hash browns will still be sizzling on the grill. I wanted to take the classic humanity, fuck yeah, sci-fi trope, and strip away the familiar elements. I didn't want to write about space marines, grand space operas, or laser-spewing dreadnoughts. Instead, I handed the fate of the galaxy over to a chronically exhausted, underpaid guy who just wants to finish cleaning the grease trap so he can clock out. The juxtaposition of a high-tech, self-serious, alien armada getting absolutely dismantled by a cast-iron skillet, a bucket of bleach, and a frozen Thanksgiving turkey is the exact kind of absurd, blue-collar black comedy I love. To me, Marcus represents the ultimate human resilience. When faced with the unknown terrors of the universe, we don't necessarily need power armor. We have caffeine, a healthy dose of spite, and the sheer unadulterated willpower required to avoid losing an attendance bonus. Heirs to the graveyard shift workers, the real unsung badasses of this planet.